It is so important for the Forest Products Laboratory to continue to test wood.
As you go into the wood itself, you will see structure. We need to know the structure of the wood. The chemistry, how you decompose the different components of wood to be useful to the smallest level. How you use the characteristics and the strength properties of different species to build the strongest structures for high-rise buildings. Wood anatomy and structure, wood physics, how things move through wood, how strong wood is, how wood burns, and how much energy it releases. All those things makes it for a very unique science called wood science.
The Forest Products Laboratory builds on years, over 100 years of research related to wood. It's crucial and important for us to continue this research as we consider that America's forests are renewable resources, and as we discover ways that we can really think about utilizing those renewable resources that benefit the people, the economy, and the industries.
One of the early directions of Congress to the lab was to utilize wood waste. And that has been something that we as wood scientists have been doing for all of our careers. How do we utilize that material that is a byproduct of the waste stream? And so we have a whole line of new innovations.
There's a lot of materials available from a forest. And do you know how many tons of lignin a year available in the United States? And there's over 20 million tons lignin available in the United States. And only less than 5% lignin are being used for different products. One of the things that we're looking at is using the biochar panel to remove contaminant from all kind of wastewater.
Right now, a large focus of our work is on using cellulose nanomaterials. Cellulose nanomaterials are new and exciting materials derived from wood, and this is done often for paper, where wood is ground down or pulped into fibers. So for example, we can take cellulose nanomaterials and we can incorporate into cement. And you don't think of cement as a construction material that is typically a forest product or a forest product application, but if you take the cellulose nanomaterials and incorporate that into cement, we find that it can harden faster and provide advantages to the building products. When we installed our pilot facility at the Forest Products Lab, it allowed material scientists such as myself to take the material and really start to look at some of these different applications. So the pilot facility at the Forest Products Laboratory is the first pilot facility that produced cellulose nanomaterials at scale in North America.
This is a pulp molded tray, and so we are keeping the food fresh longer just by adding those nanomaterials so that we can start scaling that up.
If you're a researcher or a scientist, this is basically a playground. The research we do here is serious, but the tools and the mechanisms and the lab space that researchers have available to them is an area that you just won't find anywhere else.
So here at the Forest Products Laboratory, we can perform mechanical testing on a variety of scales. They start with small material coupon tests. That's to gauge the strength and stiffness of wood materials in general. And then the tests can range in scales to the size of actual structural components, such as the notch beams that are next to me. Those would be on the scale that a house structure might be constructed at. So when a notch is installed in a beam, it creates a stress concentration at the corner. And when that beam then bends, a crack will form and propagate. And what we're studying here is the effects of that crack and predicting the capacity of the beam due to the notch formation. Research in wood structures is important because timber structures are used by the general public. We're advancing that research as well to make wood structures safer.
I'm currently sitting on a stack of cross-laminated timber. You can see here that each layer of this is a whole layer of typical 2x6. These are used for large-scale structures. These are all types of tests that we have to do here in order to make sure that the building structures that are going to be made out of them can be made with confidence and with experience.
We came up with this kind of grand vision of building a 14-story mass timber tower right downtown Madison. And it was a really, really fruitful partnership with Forest Products Lab because they were able to kind of support our learning curve of how to really build with mass timber.
They were able to take on that heavy lifting and do that comparison so that other developers across the country or the world would actually know how these different tools compare between each other and how reliable these different assessments are.
So the Forest Products Lab was instrumental in getting the 3-hour fire rating. And the 3-hour fire rating didn't exist yet in North America. And not only was it important to get it, but it was important for the authorities to accept those because that's a variance to the code. And so having that knowledge really close to Milwaukee was also critical. What's really interesting about all of these tests, all of this science, is that it's an intuitive thing for people. And we can connect their everyday experiences with the science that is actually tested at Forest Products Lab.
Propane calibration number 2. So when wood is exposed to fire, it first starts to thermally degrade. That means the chemical bonds within it start to break down. As they break down into smaller and smaller pieces. And those little pieces escape from the wood and they're called volatiles. A lot of them are actually flammable volatiles. So when that fire meets the wood and those flammable volatiles are coming out, it just keeps combusting, it keeps burning. Most buildings have wood-based building materials in them. Whether that affects how the structural frame is built, or if it's an interior finish, you want to make sure that that's safe from structural collapse or safe for first responders to enter and extinguish fires in the case of an event.
They included us in actual burn tests as far as we could attend and we could observe. So for us to be able to get eyes on it, it lent it a tremendous amount of credibility. I can't emphasize it enough. Information is king.
A lot of different formats here for treating various kinds of wood, either through pressure or dip treatment. We typically want to suit up. We'll have, these are chemical resistant Tyvek suits for safety to keep chemicals from splashing on our skin. Basically, dip treating is the easiest, most economical way to incorporate a preservative wood based on the specification. A lot of the treatments that we do here will feed our long-term field testing. We've been doing that since about the 1920s.
Our two main test field sites are in Madison, Wisconsin and in Saussure, Mississippi, which represents two different hazard zones in terms of risk of decay and termite activity. Insects damage wood in two different ways. In one way, they will actually consume the wood material itself, so they're actually using the wood as a food resource. And then the other way is using it as a place to nest in. One of our main focus areas is looking at military wood packaging boxes. So the military requires these boxes to be able to withstand 2 years in a field environment. anywhere around the world and over 20 years in storage conditions. And so a lot of our work has looked at trying to make sure that whatever chemical they're using meets those durability requirements. So when we first started working on this project, the main organisms we were focused on were the decay fungi and the termites. These are really major threats when you get field exposure.
I work on decay fungi, trying to understand what makes them decay wood. This can be anywhere from watching them eat a piece of wood, which it takes a lot longer than you think. We work with the American Wood Protection Association, and they create standards to test different wood treatments against different organisms that break down wood. These are laboratory testing that we perform. Once the fungi are growing, we then introduce whatever wood product that we're testing. So it could be untreated wood, it could be treated wood, it could be new products like cross-laminated timber. Those are subjected to our already growing fungi, and then the fungi are incubated at a certain temperature and time. We wait until they break down the wood. At the end of the test, we measure the weight loss of the wood, and that equates to how effectively the wood is broken down by the fungus.
We call this chamber the car wash, and that stands for the Chamber for Analytic Research on Wall Assemblies Exposed to Simulated Weather. And the reason we put walls in the car wash is to test different types of wall construction. We build a full-size wall, and we move it into that chamber. So once the wall is in the car wash, the first thing we do is turn on the rain, and the rain comes from the nozzles on the top of the car wash, and those drop little droplets of water that go straight down, just like the rain outside goes straight down. We have a wind generator in the back, and that blows a strong wind that picks up those raindrops and then deposits them on the wall. And then we also have lamps that simulate sunlight. When the lamps get turned on, that produces heat, and heat, just like the sun produces heat when it comes out, and that heat can drive the moisture into the wall because the heat and moisture move together. Once we've analyzed the data, we write it up into a paper that could get submitted to a peer-reviewed journal or a trade journal or an industry organization. The data then goes from the peer-reviewed publication to the industry organization, and those ultimately inform the standards that impact people's daily use of wood in construction.
So you may think that there's no difference between the wood that comes from a white oak as opposed to the wood that comes from a red oak. But there is an anatomical characteristic in white oak that allows us to use white oak for some purposes that we can't use red oak for. It's very exciting when you see people from all over the world coming here and realizing that we have samples of wood that come from their countries that they have never seen. This collection is pretty diverse, one of the oldest collections in the world, and it has samples that are unique and that they represent wood or species of plants that are not found anymore in the wild. For example, this is one of my favorites here, Lignum vitae, that's the common name. Guaiacum is the genus. This, for example, comes from the Caribbean, and it was unfortunately has been harvested almost to extinction. Illegal trade of wood involves harvesting species that are not allowed to be harvested. Now, it is hard to identify or differentiate these species once you have only the wood. So we have developed wood identification manuals to help those authorities that are in charge of controlling wood trade to be able to identify woods that might look or are different to what they are normally used to recognizing in the legal wood trade market.
Some people find it hard to believe, but wood anatomy actually turns out to be important in real life. In 2001, the National Transportation Safety Board was investigating a mid-air crash between two small planes. They had found wood under a flap of one of the planes, and the investigators sent it to us. And so we carefully extracted that wood and compared that wood to a piece of the known wooden propeller from the other plane. And we were able to determine that they were both, in fact, Sitka spruce. And that helped inform the NTSB to understand how these planes came together and crashed. We've worked with law enforcement agencies all across the country for almost a century now in assisting to combat crime, to combat illegal logging, and to improve the lives of the American people.
Others come to us, and we work in collaboration and partnership across hundreds of different organizations to do the work we do here. And that's what is the magic. Our ability to leverage a little investment, a little of this, a little of that, some unique facilities, and a absolutely fabulous, dedicated, brilliant, innovative group of employees.